I don't want to scare you, but let's imagine for one moment that Donald Trump does get into office. Which is a distinct possibility. And he decides to declare war on, say, the Republic of Bikini Island. Australians, we will have to march off to war with our 40-year-old Collins-class submarines to join the Allies in subjugating Bikini Island for the Donald. That's because we are in the AUKUS pact. Australia, UK and US. The greatest hospital pass in Australian history, bar none. It's a hospital pass by none other than the dear former Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, himself dubbed ScoMo. ScoMo was the guy who, while secretly appointing himself to his 5 secret ministries, decided to strike the secret pact with the Americans, the AUKUS pact. Zero consultation with ordinary Australians. And then he wedged Albo, the incumbent. When Albo was in opposition, he gave old Albo and his crew just a few measly hours to decide on whether to be wedged and pilloried as weak on national security, or to sign up to what Paul Keating has described as the worst deal in all history. Albo selected the former option. And not only has Albo consequently been sucked into giving $370 billion to the US and the UK, but he's also said, yep, no worries, we will dispose of your nuclear submarine waste in Australia for you too. And we'll give you some military bases here. Give you our sovereignty while paying the travel expenses even of the Yanks and the Pommy officials coming down under on their defence junkets. This is a one-way street. And in the Australian system, it's not Parliament, it's not Congress, which votes to go to war. There is no vote. It is the decision of one man, Albo. And if Peter Dutton, heaven forbid, should somehow scrape into office, it will be Peter's decision. And we know what Peter would do. He would invade Bikini Island if Rupert Murdoch told him to. We can thank former Senator and Submariner Rex Patrick for a lot of the revelations and deservedly wrecking ball commentary about the AUKUS alliance since. And Rex has another break today on the McHale's Navy defence establishment under Captain Binghamton Richard Marles. Australia does not have the capability to go to war. Such is the farce in defence procurement over many years, nor will it have that capability for years. And don't ask me, that is Rex's view, which we can count on or take seriously because 1, he's independent, and 2, he's an ex-serviceman and politician and submariner. There are principally 4 reasons why this debacle is upon us all. The failure of the media is 1, abject kowtowing to the US another, so abject that we're now financing a genocide, secrecy in the political process which allowed it to happen, and lastly, the man himself, ScoMo. Scomokio. Having struck the AUKUS pact, which now enriches the US and puts young Australians baying in the crosshairs of conscription for a war against China, our greatest trading partner, China, yes, that's where the Hawks want to go. ScoMo marched off after his time in office here to join a US defence consultancy. The contention is that Morrison and Pompeo, Mike Pompeo, were drawn to each other because of their religious connection. Morrison and Pompeo became good friends during their time in politics, with common ground, both when it comes to their passion for national security, their concerns about the Chinese Communist Party, and their deep personal faith. Now, Morrison believes in what's called the 7 Mountains Mandate, so it was no personal conundrum for him to take on multiple ministries, to climb those mountains. He was ordained, you see, in his own mind. Pompeo and Morrison were pictured at an All Horizons church service in 2019. Horizons Church is a 7 Mountains Mandate church. They developed a friendship that influenced Australian foreign policy in its wake on China, on Israel, and AUKUS. And this has taken them both through the revolving door to post-politics jobs in defence and security, jobs dependent on their previous roles and their previous decisions. You can see where we're going here. Political pull is not just about donations. Donations are toxic enough and influential, but only in part, not nearly as influential as lobbying and post-political appointments. Now, the two men appear to have had each other on speed dial, as Peter Whish-Wilson, the Green Senator, noted in Parliament. He as PM then, and Pompeo, first as the director of the CIA and then Trump's Secretary of State. They spoke weekly, apparently, and their calls were not recorded or transcribed. Why not? Who knew about and permitted this breach of Australian security? We're outraged by secret ministries, but why aren't we outraged about the secret phone calls between Scott Morrison and Mike Pompeo? The private religion and friendship, personal phone calls, is a perfect cover for an Australian PM to talk about anything and be influenced about anything. Did they communicate through personal emails? Because Pompeo himself has been embroiled in a personal email scandal. Did they discuss China policy? Did they develop AUKUS together? And did they inform each other about the world's number one political prisoner, Julian Assange? In November 2022, the Hudson Institute, an American security think tank, appointed Morrison to the Strategic Advisory Board of its China Centre. Morrison's appointment to the Hudson Institute was at the invitation of his, quote, dear friend, chair of the Strategic Advisory Board and former US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Did they discuss Israel, a country very dear to Mike's heart? He has been pictured on video dancing with IDF soldiers celebrating the massacre of Palestinians. Christian Zionists, they are. Mike Pompeo, former Vice President Mike Pence, they believe in a specific theological interpretation of the Bible that focuses on the claim that the secular state of Israel is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Morrison specifically changed policy in Australia to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel rather than Tel Aviv. Why? It seems that when it comes to the scriptures, ScoMo tends to forget those bits like blessed are the peacemakers, love thy neighbour, forgiveness, all that sort of stuff. He just goes from smiting people in the Old Testament straight to Revelations and ethno-religious predestination. Now, exactly what influence on Australian defence and security decisions are there, especially AUKUS? How much input did Pompeo have? Where is the disclosure on this? Now, the Hudson Institute names Scott Morrison, Boris Johnson and Mike Pompeo as architects of the AUKUS deal, even though it was delivered under Joe Biden. Did Pompeo influence Morrison on Julian Assange? It's impossible to think otherwise. Pompeo hates Julian Assange because Julian Assange embarrassed him. Did Morrison know about the spying on Assange? Did he know about Pompeo's intention to frame Assange with espionage charges? To quote Andrew Wilkie, the independent Member of Parliament, and I would add, he said in the chamber, I think the reason the Australian government is acting or behaving the way it is simply because the Australian government puts our bilateral relationship with the United States ahead of all else. The Australian government thinks that our relationship with Washington is more important than the rights of Australian citizens. I think it's that simple, said Wilkie, and that's a really ugly situation to be in. Senator Whish-Wilson, just to support what Andrew is saying, we only found out a few months ago that Mike Pompeo and Scott Morrison had each other on speed dial. Now, Mike Pompeo was the head of the CIA at the time, and he was the instigator of this political persecution of Julian Assange. And when the head of the CIA and the Prime Minister have got each other on speed dial, said Whish-Wilson, that just shows you how close this relationship is. Now, Pompeo has promoted Morrison since to several US think tanks, like the Hudson Institute, and now they are both cashing in on AUKUS with advisory roles in defence and security companies. Kevin Rudd, as ambassador, the former Labor PM, had to host Morrison and ex-Trump evangelicals at dinner one night. We're all paying for this, of course. It's the Australian taxpayer that pays for these sorts of things. Was Morrison paid by the Taiwan government for his speech in October 2023 when he was still in Australian Parliament? Did he declare it on his register of interests? Perhaps he wasn't paid, but Pompeo was paid. The revolving doors in politics between corporations, big business, and governments is an horrendous problem for Australia, and there needs to be more disclosure around it and some rules around it, perhaps laws, not just guidance notes. So Morrison joins the consulting firm American Global Strategies as a non-executive vice chairman. He assumes a strategic advisor role with AUKUS investor Dine Maritime, set up by ex-JP Morgan people, alongside former US Secretary of State and ex-CIA Director Mike Pompeo. The venture capital company invests in technologies related to the joint security agreement that was orchestrated under Mr. Morrison's leadership. Was it under Morrison's leadership or Pompeo's influence? This is a story about two men who stand to enrich themselves personally, financially, and highly from their warmongering clients who peddle weapons. Dozens of former politicians and generals and defence chiefs now in the weapons lobby, using all the expertise which they gained in their careers, which we financed as public servants, now working for corporations who profit from war. And these people are by no means friends of the climate. Only last month, Scott Morrison was listed as a strategic advisor at the newly created Seafloor Minerals Fund, alongside former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo again. The Seafloor Minerals Fund claims critical minerals on the seafloor, quote, can be extracted with minimal environmental impact from allied jurisdictions. And it also claims that it will serve as the capital partner the new industry needs, quote, committed to catalysing and de-risking the full supply chain. That's French for lobbying, peddling political influence, and bribing people in government. Four of the fund's most senior people, including Morrison, are behind venture capital firm Dine, set up to support the strategic goals of AUKUS, and also a backer of experimental deep-sea mining projects in the Pacific Ocean. Thank you for your support here at the West Report. Please like, share, and comment about these incredibly important public interest issues in the section below.